I think Emmanuel will be running through the images quickly, so we get a look at them before we start. Okay, thanks for that. I'm assuming judges will take it in turns to comment and mark, and alphabetical order. Terry, if you want to start off with the first one, and then Tom comments first on the second one, and we'll take it from there. We've had a few people join us, so just to say again, the session is being recorded for publication on a public YouTube channel. So if you're not happy, you might want to switch off your video stream and possibly anonymize your name if that's the case. Okay, over to you, Emmanuel, and to Terry.
if Tom and I are going to be alternating, and this is directed at Tom mainly, if there's something which you think I've missed or you want to add in on any image, by all means, please do. It's very, very rare you'll get two people agreeing on every image.
I'll agree with you there, Terry.
Yeah. So anything like you think I've missed out or whichever, then by all
no
means,
problem. Likewise.
Please
Likewise.
do. Thank you. Yeah. So this particular image, I thought that this lady was a very strong character. The image itself, it's presented well, it's balanced well, the composition's good, and that engaging look back towards the photographer as well, I think is very, very powerful. Could you improve the image by taking a slightly different angle? Perhaps you might have done if you could have dropped your camera height a little, very slightly, just to get more on the same eye level as the subject. And also try and avoid that white area to the top right hand corner as well, on the vertical line coming down there into the head. But just little things about changing your position slightly at the time of capture. You could have made this a little bit stronger. Would you like my score for this one?
Yes, probably mark as we go along if both judges are happy with that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I scored this one a 7.
Okay, I mean, much like Terry, I thought it was a good composition, plenty of narrative with the added bonus of eye contact. It's aesthetically pleasing and well executed. Perhaps a little more contrast or brightness might have enhanced it a little bit. The top right, although it's bright, it's not brighter than the whites in the actual shawl of the woman in the image itself. So I mark this one at 9. I think it's down to me to start. Vixen in the Morning Sunshine. Unfortunately, it's a pleasing image, presumably taken in the wild. However, it suffers a little bit in post-production. The animal's well captured and sharp, but the author appears to have undertaken some suspect masking or cutting out of the subject. The edges of the fur are not very well defined, and once you see, I don't want to be too unkind, but basically somebody needs to help you out with your actual masking technique. If you wanted to provide some differential focus with this image, it needs to be done a little bit better than this. Unfortunately, I couldn't mark it much higher than 4.
Okay, I agree with what Thomas just said there. The actual cutout of the animal down the left hand side isn't up to standard, but nonetheless, I marked it higher than Tom. I marked this at an 8, and I did that for a number of reasons. Yes, I agree that the masking around the edges isn't very good, but looking at the positives in the image, I think the animal's got a really strong look on its face. The color palette works through, and I just think that the author really has tried hard to create something. And if you can try and get past the obviously way it's being put together, I think that there is merits in this. So I mark this one as an 8. So I'm quite far out from Tom, and it's refreshing to see. To be honest, it's good to see people with different viewpoints and different scores. Okay, number 3. So I think I'm on the odd numbers there. Tom, is the easiest way to remember this.
Yeah. Okay, mate.
Yeah. So initially, the composition on this was very strong. I think the use of the slow shutter speed has been used to good effect. There's a lot of positives in this picture. Unfortunately, it's let down by the sky. The sky's got a lot of artifacts in there, and it's got some banding, particularly in the top left-hand corner, and that bright spot right in the center. And when you look around the image, it almost takes on an unnatural look the more you look at the picture. So I think perhaps it's worth just the rework of the author wanted to do that, just to try and make it look a little bit more natural in certain areas, in particular in the sky. So I marked this one a 7.
Okay, I agree with Terry, really. The one thing for me was, even though it's a colour image, it is quite grey throughout in its tonal range. It's good composition, but I think the bridge itself is competing a little bit with the water. I'm not quite sure whether the author was thinking water or thinking bridge. But the title is Bobbio, which is a small town in northern Italy, I believe. And it's neither a shot of the town. And basically the water and the bridge seem to be competing because of the tonal range in the photograph itself. I know Terry was mentioning about the banding, but I did find that some of the images that we were sent were quite low in resolution, and that might be down to the downsizing of the image when we actually received them. So I tried to ignore that as much as I could where it wasn't very obvious. But I marked this one at 6.
Yeah, could I just amend my score, please? I've actually put my scores in advance. I actually did mark this as a 6 myself. I've just looked at the wrong lineage on the score sheet I've got in front of me.
This is Stalker. A little bit of pop art here. Obviously has some narrative with some elements created in post-production as far as I can see, but it's not for me to actually guess how it was created. The figures in the eye sockets look as if they've been from a donor image and seem to be at a lower resolution than the main image. I think the actual masking again has let this particular image down, but somebody's actually tried to be quite creative with this. I actually like the skull wall art, I think it is, but I think the actual details in the eye socket let the image down a little bit, so I've scored this at 6.
Okay, yeah, I agree with Tom's observations in this. I think it's a very striking image. The pictures in the eye sockets, particularly the one on the right hand side, I thought was at odds with the rest of the picture. The inverted one on the left, I thought fitted with the general look of the picture, but that one on the right, it's for me, it just stopped the image scoring any higher than it did. This one scored a 7. So I think this one's mine, isn't it? Technically a good image, good upright, nice and straight. It's well recorded, it's well exposed. It's nice and tight along the top. It takes us right into the picture, and the way the shadow is lined up as well, and it's encompassing the clock. It's been very, very purposely put together. When I look down at the bottom edge of the frame, however, I can see signage, I can see a bin, I can see the tops of cycles. And whenever you're looking at an image like this, you've got to wonder what the author is trying to present to me. And perhaps a tighter crop or an upright crop, a portrait crop, just concentrating on the parts what the author wants to present, which I think is the shadowed area and encompassing the clock in the central area of the building. So this one, I marked this at a 7.
Yeah, pretty much what Terry said I've actually got written down in front of me here. The only thing which is really distracting from being a better image is the clutter at the bottom of the frame with the bin and the signage, but it's difficult without extensive cloning for me to know how you would actually crop that out. As has been said, I think a vertical crop just concentrating on the center of the building with the shadow might have been a much stronger composition, but it's been well seen, and it's been nice to be captured. I also scored this at a 7. Chanctonbury trees. I think this is in the South Downs, although I've not been there myself. It's a nice piece of monochrome, well exposed and balanced. Side lighting's given the subject shape, but the image, I think, is lacking a point of interest, and there's no real atmosphere to lift it above that. I scored that again at a 7.
Okay, so yeah, I agree with Tom on that. It's when you look into the image, you're looking for somewhere to rest your eye, and there really isn't anything in there. It really is, you know, the tree line, that's the image. I did notice some haloing as well up the side of the trees, but that could be in the way the images are being downsized and sent over. I don't know, but if it's in the original file, that's something to consider for future images. And I also scored this one a 7. Okay, mushrooms. I thought this was a very striking image again. The dark background is just a hint of texture going on. I thought it supported the image, and you know, that to my eye, they look like they're being lit well. Little bits and pieces in there, the little spiders, webs, and things going on in the image. So I thought this one presented well, and I actually scored this one a 9.
Yeah, I didn't quite see it the same way that Terry did, unfortunately. The authors tried to be creative with the lighting and is to be commended for that. But I think some areas are actually lacking lighting. If you look at the left, I'm not sure if it's a mushroom or a toadstool, but basically the back half of the underside is not lit at all. And I think if you're going to include things like spider webs, you need to make sure that they're either in there because you want them in there, or clear them away to try and tidy things up a little bit. There's one particular web which is going out of frame and it's not lit. It just looks like it's not been tidied up enough on site. There's obviously lighting in the background because you can actually see some of the background poking through. But again, you've got quite blank areas, top left and bottom right. I don't think it's quite made it, unfortunately, but I did score it a 6. I think it's me, isn't it? Number 8. Sculpture is the title. It's sculptural. I'm not sure it's a sculpture. But I do think it's an excellent image of its type. It certainly has a wow factor and impact. It has great technical execution and colour harmony. I don't really think there's an awful lot more I can say about that other than this score of 10.
Okay, it's my turn to differ slightly with some now.
I know what's coming.
I do think it's a good image. The colours are good in it. It's got good form, good shape. I think it's too tight, to be fair. If you look at the top of the frame, probably 25% plus of the frame is just quite empty. Perhaps a different crop, a panel crop, and just show more of the actual pool in the water itself. Might say give it a stronger composition, but it is a good image, and I scored it a 7. Right, my turn, and very striking image again. An unusual pose. It's not one I'm sure I could manage for too long, but it's good conversion on the main. A little bit heavy in the shadows in some spaces, but once you get past that initial impact and I start looking at the image, and I'm looking to see a little bit of a narrative and what it's all about, and I'm failing to see that. but it's a striking image, and I scored it an 8. An 8. Yeah, it was an 8.
Okay. Yeah, I felt it was quite graphic in the way it was actually presented. But once you get past that and you start looking at the image, it's been crafted. It's not been so like just stand there and let me take your photograph sort of thing. There's been some direction in this. I'm not sure about the title though. I don't think Loneliness, which is the title, actually says much about the pose or what the subject is. I think there is narrative there. It's just that I can't place my finger on it. So I marked that at a 9.
Okay, Deep in Prayer. I thought this was an interesting image. Interesting expressions on the chap at the back, and I am quite interested to see what the guy on the right hand side is reading and what the connection is between the two. I thought the palace in this was quite pleasant as well, and the light obviously coming through a window or another light source on the left. It's just crafted and given shape to both of the characters. Little bit of a problem with lens correction going on. They've got good verticals on the right, but they're leaning over on the left hand side. Perhaps that could have been put together slightly differently. And also the guy's foot on the far side facing the camera. He's got that bottom frame slicing right through his toes. And it's always better if you can to crop in more into a person rather than just on the edges there. So perhaps cropping some of the bottom away might have took us in a little bit tighter to the image. But I thought it was an interesting image, and I scored it at a 9.
Yes, I thought it had good composition with narrative. The colour and the tonal range of it are good throughout, and I also picked up on the lean to the left by the verticals. The verticals are indeed straight on the right hand side, but a little bit of perspective correction. Bottom left corner would have straightened everything out on the other side. It could have been done as well by adjusting the camera height, maybe stooping a little bit lower. You've obviously got good access to your subjects. I'm not so sure the guy at the back is deep in prayer. It looks like he's waiting for something else, but good image, and I scored it at 8. This is mine, number 11. Club stairs. Not so sure it's taken in a club, and if it is, it's in a pretty fancy club. A good architectural study, good balance, nice corrected verticals. I thought originally it was slightly overexposed, but the highlights and shadows are very well contained, and it's technically well executed. I gave this an 8.
Yeah, I agree with all Tom's comments there. I scored this slightly less. When I was looking, I did think the highlights were slightly out, particular on the areas where the uplighters are. But it's been well set up. But perhaps to improve it, you could have pulled back a little bit more, or just to include the frontal areas of the balustrades there, just to show the bottom end of them in some way, if that would have been at all possible, but perhaps it wasn't. Yeah, so I scored this one an 8. I've already given my score, didn't I? Yeah. No, sorry, I beg your pardon, I scored it a 9. I'm getting confused with these scores because I've got them wrote down in front of me, but I've only got the numbers, and the numbers are disappearing off the screen. So I keep just have to double check back to make sure I've got them on. Okay, so on to the next one, please.
Are we stuck?
Yeah, I think something's happened, doesn't it?
Emmanuel, we seem to have an issue that we're not moving on to the next image. We're looking for image number 12 now. We seem stuck on image 11, which got a total of 17 marks. There we go.
Okay, so who's this, Tom? Is this me or you?
I can't remember. I think we're both mixed up again. You go first.
Want me to go? Okay. So this is image number 12 now, isn't it?
Yep, coming into land.
Coming into land. Okay, a lot to like in this. Good colours, the background muted out, giving good subject separation. Part of the insect are in good focus, some perhaps not in as much as focus. And it's a good moment as well, isn't it? You can't have everything in these things. Obviously, it'd be possibly a stronger image if it was fully side on, or perhaps the insect was just coming facing the camera. But as it is, I scored it a 7.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Terry. It's another pleasant image, but it's very, very difficult to pull off when you're working at this sort of close range at almost the macro level. When you've got distance between a subject closer to the camera than one further away, it's very difficult to actually pinpoint your point of focus, which is why the bee, which is actually moving, its body is not in focus, but there are bits of it which are in focus, which can't, which can't be exact, because some parts of the flower, I think the very center of the flower is actually in focus, but the rest of it isn't. So as I said, it's very difficult to pull off, but it's another pleasant image with good color balance, and tried a little bit of differential focus to throw the background well out. Well seen, but I can only give it a 6. Right, empowerment. It's a good creative art image. It has plenty of wow factor. The colour harmony is excellent, but we've got minor blowout with the highlights, I think, in the hair and the lady's chest. You also can't see the top half of her right arm. It's hidden by whatever effects are going on there, and the left arm is almost hidden by the braids in the hair, which tends to knock it out just a little bit. But a good creative art image, and I scored it at 7.
Okay, agree with Tom's comments there. Fantastic hair, isn't it? I've not seen hair like that for a long time, especially on my head. But it is a good piece of art. A very, very striking image. On the file I looked at, I thought there was detail loss on the face and on the forehead and the hair. So I marked it down for that. So I actually scored this one a 5.
Robin.
Okay, and this one's over to me again,
Yep.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
So Robin, well caught, it's big in the frame, good sharp beak, eye, good details in the feathers. From a composition point of view, I thought it was quite tight, and perhaps you could have given it a bit more room to breathe. And it's possibly not the best angle to catch the bird from, with the twig run right the way through the center of the bird. But the bigger issue for me, I thought the color balance was a little bit too cool, and it could have benefited by just being a little bit warmer. And I scored this one a 6.
Yeah, I think every competition's got to have an R picture on, hasn't it? I think it's a nice capture with good composition. It's aesthetically pleasing, but doesn't really have much of a wow factor to grab me attention. Um, I think it's because we see so many. I know we're judging it in this competition and not against others, but as I say, I think there's a little bit of grain structure towards the tail as well, which makes me think it's as an enlargement from a, a much wider picture. And I scored this as 7.
Come on now. Robin is long tree at lamp pattern.
Limpedan, I think it's actually called. I think we see an awful lot of these, but it still has to be photographed. It's a very popular subject, certainly here in the UK. I think it's got great tonal range, especially in the shadows. There is detail in there. The file I was looking at seemed to be a bit more than the one I'm looking at here on the screen. But I thought it was a great image all round, and it's very difficult to know what to do with reflections. We're all captivated by reflections, and we tend to get caught. Do we show the whole tree or just part of it? But the horizon's been lifted here, and the reflection in the water is there, but it's not actually competing with the main part of the subject, which is in the top half of the frame. I actually scored this one a 10 because it's the best version I've seen of it for a long time.
Okay, so yeah, this is another one of those which we, Tom and I, are going to disagree on. Thought composition was good. Biggest issue I found within certainly the picture I looked at today on my computer was the shadow area. It was devoid of any detail. Although I'm looking now and I can see more detail on the one being presented. So yeah, I did score this down, but I'm gonna change my score. I'm going to be a nuisance to you guys on the dicentra and the marking, and I'm actually going to lift this up based on what I can see now. And this is one of the problems when you prejudge images. It's always better, in my opinion, if you can score them as you see them as they come alive and everybody sees the same image. But the one I saw today definitely didn't have any detail in the shadows whatsoever. Yeah, so I'm going to score this one an 8.
Triple vision.
Okay, so it's back to me again, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've gone from odds to evens. I think.
Yeah, I know. I might be down to me. Sorry.
Okay. Interesting image, interesting location, and although you see this type of image time and time again, this one I thought just held my attention. Just the way it had been presented, it was different, and the expressions on the lady there. Technically, I just felt it needed to be a little bit stronger in terms of the lady on the left hand side. You can clearly see the cutout isn't as good as what it possibly could have been. But overall, I thought it was a good image, and I marked this one at a 7.
Okay, just give me a second. Yeah, I thought there was a fun triptych within the same image. It's got a certain narrative, but the way I read it, it was from a model shoot, whether it was a pro or an amateur shoot, and it was taken with that purpose in mind. But if you look at it from a fashion shoot point of view, you've got every view that you want of the actual model itself. So it has good model narrative, We have a back view, a front view, and a side view, but I felt it was lacking in the shadows. But you've got to be able to balance, when you're taking either 3 images on the same shot or whether you're actually compositing them later on, you've got to be able to bring those shadows areas in. But I did score it a 9.
Stillness.
Sometimes simple is best. It's a simple composition. Has good impact in its simplicity. I tend to go for this sort of image personally, but I've got to take that out. But I find it aesthetically pleasing with good camera and lighting control and good tonal range throughout the blacks through to the whites. I scored this a 9.
I agree with Tom on all that. Nothing else to add really to those comments, and I scored it a 10.
Singing Wren.
Singing Wren. Okay, back over to me. Bird sitting very well in the frame. Good compositions, nice, easy on the eye. I thought the colour palette consistent right the way through. The only issue I did have with this image was that muted background. It looks too false. And really, if you have, or if the author has made that in post-production, perhaps just rolling it back slightly just to show a little bit more of the background of what's going on. You don't need it to be washed out completely like this. Also, in the center of the image, on the center of the wood, what the bird is sitting on, around the center, you can see some of what looks like the background overlaying at a lower opacity onto the wood. But the birds, it's a good shot of the birds. It's side on, so we've got good sharpness along it. It's sitting nicely in the depth of field area. It's got its mouth open, so it's a little bit of behavioural elements in there as well. And I scored this one an 8.
Yeah, I mean, there's not an awful lot I can add to it. I just thought it was an excellent composition with good subdued coloration. It does look a little bit jagged above the tree stump or log or whatever it is on the right hand side, and you can actually see a bit of a faded part of the timber in the middle of the frame there, and for that reason I scored it an 8.
Rose.
I actually love this image from a personal perspective, not just from the composition itself. I felt it was a nice fine art study with good impact and mood, well controlled in camera, and sympathetic post-production to show off the pastel coloration. I scored this a 10.
Yeah, agree with all what Thomas said there. I just thought that it was ever so slightly too softened, but not by much, but just a little bit too much. We've lost where a little bit more texture in the flower itself might have benefited it, and I scored it a 9.
Flamingo.
Okay, it's always difficult when you shoot in this type of sunlight, very, very strong, and it's always difficult. It's softer sunlight will always give you a much better quality of light, and be easier to contain. But having said all that, I think the author has done really well. You've kept the details in those highlights, and it's composed well. The reflection supports the image as well. And as on the tree picture, what Tom mentioned earlier, you've shifted that horizon line down, so you've not sort of got your image in half. You are showing more of the top half of the image, and that's just balancing it up nice from a composition point of view. But it's just the way that sunlight is coming in, and it's light in certain areas of the bird, and perhaps you might have been better pulling the exposure down, and making it more of a different feel to the image, instead of showing, exposing across the range of it and showing it as it is. But I actually scored this a 6.
Yeah, it's another one of those images where we've got reflections, but unlike the tree, the reflection is actually competing with the main subject, which is the bird above the horizon. Now, I've photographed a lot of flamingos in my time, and I have exactly the same problem, so the actual lighting has not done you any favors here. It's way too contrasty for the subject. However, I think you've just about held the details in the highlights. The other thing to notice, if you can do it in post-production, green is a very powerful colour, and if you can actually make a selective adjustment in the greens just to mute them slightly, that would actually make the bird stand out even more against its background. Unfortunately, there's just too much going on for me to score it any more than a 5, I'm afraid.
Okay, thought it was an interesting image. Had lots of atmosphere in there. I think the grain works well, the square crop, the different shapes taking place, and then I look further into the image, and it looks what appears to be, I don't know, some sort of markings on a pitch, a sports pitch or something like this. And I think this image really lends itself. It needs a lighthouse somewhere in the background, or something really interesting just to set it off in that respect. And I scored this image a 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found this quite an artistic composition, very much a bleak atmosphere, enhanced by the heavy grain structure of the image. It's been a good seeing eye, but lacks the impact of some of the other images have. I felt that it possibly would have worked better in a series rather than as a single image. But as I say, I found it intriguing, and I scored this a 6.
Glance.
I thought this was a great mono, with just enough differential focus for it not to be confusing. There's a little bit of the eye which is right on the edge of the fringe of the mane, but I think when you first open it up and you have a look, your eye goes straight to the zebra's eye. I think it's got a superb tonal range and good in-camera skills, so I gave this one a 10.
Okay, I'm going to go completely the opposite to Tom. No, I'm not really. It's a fantastic picture, and certainly one of the top pictures for me out of the full 40, if not the top picture. I can only echo what Tom said. I think the placement of the eye is absolutely fantastic. It really does grab your attention. And looking over to the left-hand side of the image as well, you've got the other zebras which are dropping out of focus and losing contrast and falling away, and they support the right-hand side of the image very well. If anything, perhaps a monocrop would have suited it better. I don't know, just to lose some of the top. But all that aside, it's a fantastic image, and I scored it a 10.
Congratulations to the author.
Yeah, really good.
Exhibitionists and voyeurs.
Yeah, it's been well seen, and obviously the author has very purposely placed the statue in the position with the posters in the background there. Beyond that though, that initial impact, I'm looking around it, I'm not really grabbing the feeling a further narrative to the image. Technically, some of the details are lost as well under them very bright spotlights on the background. And I scored this one a 6.
I think I can agree with Terry for the most part on this. However, I did think it was a good composition and had good narrative. This is a little bit like the image that we've seen before of Llyn Padarn. I can actually see more detail on this image on the screen now than the one I was actually sent. However, there is a little detail lost in the hoardings at the back, and I think that the statue could have done with a little bit more light as well, just to bring it up. I scored this one an 8.
Boy, keep my home clean.
Well, he must be desperate if he's living there for a home, but it's a great opportunist image. It's been well seen and captured. It's got good impact, and the authors probably had to think quickly to control the camera and the exposure. I scored this one an 8.
Okay, yeah, it's a good opportunist picture. The squirrel nicely framed up with the entrance to the bin. I just thought that the nose area on the squirrel was quite soft, although the tie detail was good, and I scored this one a 6.
Champignon.
Okay, this is back over to me now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pleasing image. It's easy on the eye. The lighting is soft but directional, and it's picking out all the details on the elements in the image well. It felt to me like it was slightly rotated to the right hand side. It may have been, but it's just the way it feels with some of the elements leaning down that side. And I actually scored this one quite high. I scored this a 9.
Yeah, champignon meaning, I think, French for mushrooms. I liked it pretty much the same as Terry did, but the more I looked at it, the more I found I didn't have anywhere to settle on. There's almost too many mushrooms. If we blank off the left-hand side of the image, it almost makes a better crop and a better layout for me. It's good lighting and tonal balance, but like I said, I think it's almost too busy in its design, and I couldn't rest my eyes anywhere, even though they've got some dominant mushrooms in the center of the image. I actually scored this one a 7.
Windy.
Windy. I think it's in reference to the national park in Uganda, which is a protected gorilla reserve. I think it's a very powerful natural history image. Has massive impact, concentrating on just a small section of the animal, which is the main focus of the subject. A good differential focus, a great narrative, and great technically, both in camera with minimal post-production as far as I can see. The only detracting part, which might have had concern, I can imagine Terry might pick this up, is the bit just to the right of the animal's hand. It's quite out of focus, but I think it's been quite deliberate by the author, and I've scored this one a 10.
Yes, agree with Tom on all those comments. And it's one of those images that doesn't need the full picture to tell the story of the image. It is powerful, and the supporting elements of the environment, although they're quite erratic and they are in different areas of the focal plane, I think they do support the image of the hand very, very well. I didn't score it quite as high, just because I think a crop from the top might have took away just a couple of the highlights in the top right hand corner, and maybe just brought us in a little bit closer. So I scored this one a 9, but it's a fantastic image.
Fibonacci.
Yeah, easy for you to say. Yeah, interesting image. The portrait presentation works well, very minimalistic. I just thought it lost a little bit of detail in the spiral as it goes round the right hand side and up to the centre there. It's quite devoid of detail, so that costs you some marks on this one. But it's good composition, presented well, just perhaps didn't have enough detail throughout the image, and I scored that one a 6.
Yeah, I can agree with Terry almost entirely on this one. I did actually score it 1 point higher at 7, but it's a powerful design with almost graphic qualities, but we do have a good portion of the underside of the stair treads there are actually missing, and I felt that the image would have looked better possibly rotated 90 degrees to the right to present a proper Fibonacci spiral.
Sky 12.
Yeah, it's an icy vista which has atmosphere and is generally pleasing. I know they're generally blue due to the sky reflecting off the water and the snow, but I felt in this case it was probably a little too much. The horizon may well be straight, but the impression is that the water is sliding down to the left. Now sometimes with landscapes it's not whether it's technically absolutely perfect, it's the impression that the image gives you when you're looking at it, and unfortunately I think this might actually be one that suffers from that, but it's going in the right direction. It might actually look better in black and white, I think, but that's not for me to say, that's down to the author. I did score it 7.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I found the actual toning of the image quite overpowering, really. And when you go to these locations to take the picture, it's always worth time just finding your composition. And just ask yourself, I mean, the things at the bottom of the frame there, you've got, I mean, where I live, these little concrete posts usually mark a, you know, something that's in the ground. But it's actually adding to, yeah, is it adding to the picture as you look in? Perhaps if you could have stepped to the left slightly, or maybe hopped over the fence, I don't know. But work a little bit harder on your composition at the time of catching. Inland waters are notorious for looking like they're falling away, even when you've got them straight. But nonetheless, for a competition, you've got to present it so it looks as if the water's level, even though the horizon might be straight, as Tom quite rightly pointed out. A couple of things when you look around as well, like that white cloud up into the just left to centre, it looks different from the rest of the clouds. It doesn't seem to quite sit right. So I don't know what the reason for that would be, but yeah, it's I scored it similar to Tom. I scored this a 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Simple Life. A good title. And again, similar comments to what I've just said about the landscape. When you're taking these pictures, stepping to the left, a foot even, can make a big difference to your picture. If you would have had that opportunity on this picture, perhaps you would have seen more of the lady's face, of her expression, but still captured what she was doing. If you look at the right-hand side of this frame now, if you look underneath the chair, in that area between the chair's legs there. We've got these twigs or whatever they are, which are quite distracting. We look up to the right hand side, we've got the glare of the green coming through. But perhaps by moving around and getting a different angle from what you're at now, you could have excluded a lot of that. And if you cover your hand over the left-hand part of the image and see what the right hand is giving us, it's not really adding to your picture. The main point of interest is over on the left. And that perhaps is where you should have got your camera more around that area and focused in on that area much more. So I scored this one a 6, unfortunately, but it's a good moment. And if you just would have worked a little bit harder at the time of capture, you could have had a much stronger image.
Yeah, it's another travel photo, I think, which has great narrative. The exposure and colour balance appear correct. However, I mean, much like Terry's made the views about just moving slightly to the left or the right or up or down, or just taking care of what's in the corners of the photo. Unfortunately, as judges, we tend to stare at these things quite a lot, and the more you stare at them, you tend to find things which niggle you, which I really like to stand back from an image and look from a viewing distance to try and get a better perspective. But if you look at the left-hand bottom left corner, you'll see a little white slither. I don't know what it's from, but it only takes a couple of millimeters crop from the left to remove that. And also the top, I'm presuming it's the back and the arm of the chair on the right-hand side. You've already cropped the sitter quite tight to her backside, if I can say that, but a little bit further over you could have lost the top of that arm as well. And anything bright in the image, your eye automatically goes towards it. So that's just basically my suggestion, but I did score it an 8.
Golfers in the mist.
Golfers in the mist. I think it's another missed opportunity. There's plenty of atmosphere in this image. It's a nice capture with all the elements exposed and controlled, but I'm kind of looking between the tree and the golfers. You have to decide as the author of these images what you want to say about your image. Is it about the golfers, which is what the title's all about, or is it about the tree? If you're asking us to look at both and make the decision for ourselves, it doesn't quite come off. But I scored this one a 7.
Okay, I thought this was a good image. I like the atmosphere from it. I did get the narrative on it. It's a typical golf course environment with the 3 golfers there. It's always better if you can see a face in these pictures, but nonetheless, I thought it sat and balanced well. And I scored this slightly higher than Tom. I scored it as a 9.
Looks like rain coming.
Okay, I think it's back to me, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, it's an interesting image and interesting sculptures. A lot of elements in there which make it work. I think the author's done good by shifting the horizon to the lower part of the image, giving us the reflection, but also showing us the break in the skies up there. I think the framing on the left and the right hand side work well and keep us into the center of the image as well. I did feel that the color balance on this was often in a number of ways. The greens are very, very vibrant, almost fluorescent, and I'm not quite sure the browns are as true as or as accurate as what they should be. So I actually scored this one a 7.
I'm pretty much agreeing with Terry on this one. It's well balanced and exposed, and the horizon line's been lowered so that the reflection in the water isn't competing with the main parts of the image. But again, that green is actually quite vibrant. The vibrancy's been turned up way too much on this particular image, but I scored it a 7. Chaos. I think it's obviously a theatre performance with slow shutter speed. It's given us plenty of narrative to bite on. Lots of impact. But it's always difficult to get the result you want when you're not in control of the lighting. And as such, there's a little burnout in the stationary dancer. It's quite bright when you compare it to the rest of the image, and there's detail loss. There might also be some slight movement in the static dancer there, but I did quite like it, and I gave it an 8.
Yep, agree with Tom on all his comments. It is always difficult in these situations, but I thought that the movements and the dancers behind were really adding to something unusual to the picture. The static dancer, his toes are burnt out, and he's got some loss of detail on the head, on the face area as well. But you know, there's not a lot you can do about that. It's out of your control, certainly, in what you're doing. So overall, thought it was a really good effort, but I scored this one an 8.
Fairfield Church.
Okay, I think this one's back to me now. And we're getting back to that type of sunlight, what you get sort of, you know, around midday. And for want of a better word, it makes pictures look quite ordinary when you photograph them in this type of light. It's very contrasty, heavy shadows, what you can see on the building. And it's to be avoided at all cost if you can. I just thought this image suffered from that light, and also the sky looked unnatural to me in this picture, and just the shapes of the shadows and just the way they presented it, it looked a little bit unreal. But I actually scored this picture a 6.
Yeah, again, I agree with Terry. It's a nice landscape and it was well captured, but the colours are quite punchy. I think you've had the vibrance turned up again in post-production. The composition doesn't look too balanced to me. It's heavily weighted over to the left-hand side. Maybe a tighter crop on the right could well have improved it. But once you get past the church itself, I don't think the animals in the foreground are doing much for it. I gave this one a 7.
The boulder.
The boulder. I'm not so sure about the title, because there's lots of rock formations in the water there. I love the water patterns, but they seem to be leading to an old ruin rather than just a boulder. I like the splash of red on the horizon there. It's got good technical execution with the slow shutter speed. It's a pleasing image to look at. Horizon is level, and as I say, the water's leading straight up to the subject, which is not necessarily just a boulder. But I gave it a 9.
Yeah, I thought this was a strong image as well. I also thought it was an image inside an image, and I'm not quite sure you needed anything beyond the horizon line. And good use, good technique, and good use of the slow shutter speed to blur the water. And that ruin, as Tom called it, it's quite intriguing, really. And I'd like to see more of that. I mean, the boulder on the left-hand side is really quite strong. It's quite large in the frame. So perhaps investigate a crop which encompasses the ruin and the flowing water, maybe lose some of the left, and make a decision whether you think above the horizon line is adding to that picture or it isn't. But I certainly think, just in my opinion, that there's a picture inside a picture there. And I scored this one a 9 also.
Past their best.
Okay, so back to me, I think, on the flowers. And good colours, good sharpness right the way through. You have to make a decision on the black background whether you think that is helping your image or detracting from it. On such a colourful image, perhaps you could have had a splash of colour there just to lift it up. But I also feel that it's quite tight as well on the sides and also along the top. And if you could have opened that up ever so slightly just to give it a little bit of space, I think it would have been, or could have been a stronger image. So I actually scored this one a 7.
Again, I have to agree with Terry, but the image does hit you between the eyes with its powerful colour set against that black background. It's got plenty of wow initially, but once you get past that, there's nothing really to rest your eye on within this image because everything appears to be in focus, or at least tries to be. Unless the eye has somewhere to rest, there's no focal point within the image, and you can't really say that the whole image is the focal point. It's more about the colour. The design isn't there because there's no flow, because of the fact that it's decaying flowers or past their best, as it says. But I also scored this a 7.
Siberian Jays.
Yeah, Siberian Jays. I think it's a super bird shot. I mean, I can't take bird shots for toffee. I wish I could take them like this. Would make a great Christmas card, I think. Shot has impact. It shows great technical skill and patience if it was actually taken in one shot. I'm not saying it wasn't. The snow has texture throughout and it exhibits great colour balance and composition. I had to score it a 10.
Okay, so yes, absolutely 100% agree with everything Thomas said. Thought this was a fantastic image as soon as I saw it. The colours, the level of contrast in there as well. You've got enough of it, but you've not overkilled it. To photograph in snow as well, it's difficult, isn't it, to get the colour balance right, to make sure you got texture in the snow, especially against a white background. But the author has achieved that right the way through. For me, this was the best image in the whole competition, and I also scored it a 10.
Congratulations again.
Dance.
Dance. Very striking image, very strong shapes in this. Not quite sure what the light is in the area of the person's left hand there. It does seem to be a little bit bright. Slight movements in the feet and also on one of the hands. And I always feel if you're doing this type of picture, you need to get it absolutely sharp and freeze the action, or you need to have purpose movement in it where you're showing people that you've purposely shot at a much slower shutter speed than what would have froze the image, to have more movement. So as it is, I'm not quite sure whether you've got intentional movement in there or it's just you're pushing the limits of the light what you had, and that was the fastest shutter speed you could achieve. Besides all that, I think the monochrome conversion is good. Again, the black background gives it a very striking and good separation, and all it's lacking really is a face instead of the back of the head. But I scored it quite high, and I scored this one a 9.
Yeah, it's another performing arts shot, showing the artist in mid-movement. I personally think it's a great composition with good technical skills on show. But like Terry, I'm a little unsure about the lighting globe the performer's holding, and I'm not sure you get lighting patterns out of a globe like that. There's something else going on there that I don't understand. The movement in the legs per se doesn't bother me that much. I would expect that anyway, certainly in a dark theatre like this one. And I scored this one an 8.
Scabious.
Scabious, yes. I had to look this one up. I wasn't quite sure. Realised it was part of a flowers genus. It's an unusual nature picture because it's obviously the flowers themselves are past their best. But you don't usually get nature pictures in monochrome like this, but I think it's well lit and well composed. Perhaps a little fussy with the amount of cobwebs, but nevertheless a pleasing composition. And the lighting has been very well controlled. A good exercise in shape and form, I feel, and I scored this a 9.
Yeah, I agree with all what Thomas said there, and I think the two main elements in this are supporting each other well, and nothing else to add to Thomas' comment really besides that, and I scored this an 8.
The bridge.
Yeah, it's a minimalistic type of picture, again in bright daylight by the looks of it, judging by the sharp shadow running across it. There's some interesting elements in this, and I'll just offer some advice to the author. Work your composition harder. When you look, you've got lines, you've got curves, there's a lot there, but I don't feel that you've explored it enough. You know, you've stepped back and you've took a picture of it overall of the image, instead of trying to work on leading lines and maybe getting angles which are a bit more dynamic. But I thought the conversion was good. You've captured the highlights well, and that black background really gives a good separation out. And I scored this one a 7.
Yeah, unfortunately, you've picked a guy with engineering experience to judge a bridge photograph. I won't hold that against you, honestly. It's a cable stay bridge design with intricate patterns, which appears to have been well captured technically. However, because I know the subject inside out, it's actually rotated the wrong way. Once I got out of that, I started looking at the actual composition. It seemed to be quite fussy. There's lots of intersecting elements on this particular bridge, and I didn't know really initially where to place my mark. But the highlights are well held. There's detail in the shadows. The blacks could possibly have been a bit blacker, but I eventually settled on a score of 7.
Christmas Angel.
Right. I may have read this image all wrong, and apologies to the author if I have. But the main subject of this image is the coloured lights, and I assume that it's Christmas decorations in a street scene. The colours grabbed my attention. I think it's been done with a zoom focusing technique. In fact, it's only now looking at it on this screen that I can actually see the angel, and I'm actually stepping back from my screen now to actually view it. So it didn't actually hit me right between the eyes when I first looked at it. Aesthetically, the composition seems a little off, and other than the actual zooming of the lights, there seems very little in the way of narrative. I gave this one a 6.
Yeah, same for me as for Tom's comments there. I thought it was quite a confusing image, and I think the clue was in Tom's commentary there that he stepped back away from the screen and actually saw the image, so perhaps it needed to be wider. But I was confused as well by the background. That didn't really support what was going on with the lights, and I found that competing. And again, I scored this very similar to Tom. I scored it as a 5.
Okay, so now we've marked all the images. And and I think this is the moment that everybody's been waiting for. Shall I read out the total scores for each club now, or we show some images?
I would have thought the best images and who produced them. I'd love to know who produced those 250 scored 20 marks.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and show images that scored 18 and higher, and it would be for Malta to tell us who the authors are. So I'm gonna do navigator. Better. None.
I think you need to show authors as well, eventually.
Yes, but unfortunately, the when we had the images uploaded up onto the system, the images only photo entry only recorded the club and the image title. So this is image by Tina Nuttall.
Well done, Tina.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
This image is by Paul Heaster.
People.
Rose. This is by Mike Farley for Croydon. Even the prior two images were by Croydon.
This is by Johan Sigurdsson from Malta.
Johan.
He's not Maltese, but he resides in Malta.
Lovely image.
Again, by the same author, Johan. Very well done. Again, from Malta, it's Nathan Camilleri.
Siberian Jays, Steve Brooker, Croydon.
Well done, Steve.
Thanks, Tina.
Good stuff.
Fantastic.
Oh.
Well done to everyone.
Stop. Stop share and the scores. You guys been counting?
I think it's very close.
Yes, it is very close. We have Croydon with a total of 299.
Fantastic.
And we have Malta with a total of 305 points.
Wow.
A difference of 6 points.
Oh, well
Very
done.
close.
Again.
Well done.
Again, well done to all.
Everyone should be commended.